AI and take a picture of their farm and see if I can get AI to generate a whole savanna on their farm. We put those down in there, and it's the most beautiful instant gratification that you can ever get in this agroforestry space. We're so short on instant gratification in agroforestry. It's really nice to be able to come into an open pasture and then 2 hours later leave, and you have fruits, nuts, pods. That's the next level here that we want to be able to add. So any tree is going to provide shade, but we want to have trees that are going to really bring a lot of additional benefits to the farm. A lot of the cost of doing business in raising pigs and poultry is in the feed that you have to buy in order to feed them. So we know that we can also plant trees that are going to drop feed for them. And then going into the fall months, then you have just a whole bunches of options. So that's persimmons and oaks and chestnuts and apples and pears and all kinds of different things that are dropping during the fall months that can provide additional feed for your livestock then.
What would you do if you had that magic power?
I would simply want trees to be able to reach maturity in 1 year. It's like super fast. I think that would, if we could do that, there would be silvopasture everywhere. Like anywhere that people would have any interest in integrating trees, there would be no excuse.
This is the Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food podcast, where we learn more on how to put money to work to regenerate soil, people, local communities, and ecosystems, while making an appropriate and fair return. Welcome to another episode. Today with the founder of Trees for Graziers, which is a very good title of a company taking grazing to new heights, which I love as an undertitle. And we're definitely or a subtitle, and we're definitely going to unpack a lot of that. Welcome, Austin.
Thank you for having me, Koen. I appreciate it.
And we start, you're listening of the podcast, so you know where we're going. But we start always with a personal question. Mm-hmm. Why do you spend most of your waking hours, I used to say awake hours, but I got corrected. Now waking hours, thinking about soil, obviously, but also about the role of trees, specifically in animal systems, and then specifically for the silvopasture side of things. Very specific of a niche within a niche.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Very, very interesting. We're going to get to that. But how come most of your, let's say, your time spent awake is spent on that?
Yeah. So I myself did not grow up in agriculture at all. I'm one generation removed. So my dad grew up on a dairy farm in Minnesota. And now I get
trees,
to,
I'm assuming.
not very many trees, actually. He was in the southern part of the state. The northern part of the state has plenty of trees. His area did not have a whole lot. They'd removed that 100 years prior. So I am a generation removed from the farm, but it is still in the background. It's in the legacy a little bit. And I only got the agriculture bug in college, and I got interested in organic produce and vegetables and that kind of thing, which led down a slippery slope into permaculture. And that's where I found Mark Shepard's book, Restoration Agriculture, which presented this idea of really large-scale, landscape-scale regeneration of the landscape through trees.
Book, huh?
Fantastic.
Really.
Inspired me.
Such a good guy. Amazing to hang out with.
Inspired so many different people who are now in the agroforestry space who probably would not be here otherwise. So that was kind of my launch into this world of agroforestry with a little bit more of a permaculture bent that I came into it from. And my first foray into agroforestry professionally was through multifunctional buffers. So this idea of, can we take a stream buffer that's there to improve our water quality and make this more attractive to farmers? Because the way that stream buffers are done is they're really benefiting not the farmer themselves, but the people downstream. So it's really hard to get the intrinsic incentives, the intrinsic benefits to the farmer out of a stream buffer. And so governments need to provide cost share and incentives, incentive payments in order to make that happen on the landscape. And I'm in Pennsylvania. I'm in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, home of a lot of small farms. And we send more pollution down to the Chesapeake Bay than any other county in the Bay watershed. So there's a lot of water quality related money sloshing around here, and a lot of conservation groups trying to get more stream buffers on the landscape. And my entry into this as a small business was, can I do something that can make these stream buffers more interesting, more beneficial to farmers? And as I was doing that, I had a couple clients who were doing grass-fed dairy. And those clients had other problems that they were dealing with. They said, like, these small, narrow corridors of streams on our farms, these are great. Let's get trees established here. But I have the whole rest of my farm, the other 50 acres or 100 acres or whatever it is, where I would like to have trees. I don't need quite as many. I don't want a forest, but I want trees for shade and maybe trees that can provide me with something else in addition to that. But how do I get my trees established in a way that doesn't completely change the way that I do my management? I don't have to take the land out of production for 5 years, 10 years while those trees get established. And at that point, I really didn't know how to do that. There weren't very many people doing this, and definitely not in an effective way that was easy for the farmer. But I knew that if we could figure this out, there's the scale of application is literally millions of acres. And there's a whole bunch of farmers that could use this and integrate it very seamlessly into their farms. Whereas a stream buffer is something that you take out of production and you're losing productivity on your farm. With the integration of trees, you can actually gain more productivity and you get ecological benefits out of it. So that's really been the key for me, is how can we make farmers more productive, more profitable, and increase our ecological productivity on the landscape by this integration of trees onto farms. That's the simple thing. And there's a whole lot to figure out on how to get trees established. And we've pretty well figured that out now. And then the next is how do we improve the quality of the trees that we're getting out there? And that's what we're working on right now. And then once we've done that, really scaling that up and seeing a lot more of that, seeing that applied on the scale of millions of acres. That's the next phase.
You mentioned these grass-fed dairy farmers were already interested in trees because of shade. There's often the thought, okay, trees are competing with the grass for sunlight, or and in this case, they clearly see or saw a benefit. Why is shade so important?
So shade is going to help livestock by reducing their heat stress, right? So right now, this time of year, March, April, May, and then in the fall again, you don't have to worry about heat stress, and grazing is perfect, and there's lush forages, and everything is great. But there's, in our area, probably about 5 months out of the year where livestock experience significantly reduced productivity because they're stressed.
Means milk, in this case, or
less
growth.
milk, less pounds that they're putting on, whatever it is, whatever type of livestock that you're using. They are less productive because they're subject to that heat stress. If they're out in the pasture and they don't have access to shade, they're just not going to produce as much. They're not going to eat as much. They don't feel comfortable. You and I don't feel comfortable if we're really hot out on a.
That's why you always see the cows or any animal on that side one, like under the trees.
That one tree or the woods edge.
No grass anymore underneath, because that's where obviously they go. We have the same effect.
And that's what people see when they think about silvopasture. They think to the neighboring farm that has one tree out in the pasture and all the cows are right underneath that all day long. And what we want to do is we want to spread our trees out so that livestock have
like system.
Exactly. Yep. Really what we're shooting for is a savanna. Another thing that we want is we want our trees to have their canopy really up far up high off the ground so that the shade moves throughout the course of the day. So rather than one short tree where all the shade is right underneath the tree all day long and then the cows are right underneath the tree all day long, we want tall trees so that the shade moves and then the livestock move along with it.
And the grass underneath gets only a small part of the day shade, and only a small part of the day livestock on it, which means it has a chance to grow.
Yes. Yep. Exactly.
Which is better for grass probably as well. If it slightly makes it not fully in the sun, like many plants suffer and in the heat stress as well. Simply pasture probably suffers.
Exactly.
And many other tomatoes, I think, and of course coffee and cocoa, etc. Shade grown is just way better. Is that the same for pasture?
That's the same for pastures, especially in our area where we are. Most of our clients are doing cool season perennial forages. So as the name suggests, they do best in the
They
cool
do
season.
really well in summer. Yeah.
Exactly. So they want to be cool. They thrive in the spring and they thrive in the fall. They don't thrive in the summer. Like the summer is when they decide to peace out because it's just too hot for them. And so by having the right amount of shade, we can actually increase the amount of growth that we have over the summer months.
And then there is a big piece. So just a bit of background. We got connected through Paul McMahon. SLM Partners, definitely a shout out because you wrote a great white paper on the investment case for Silvopasture. Clearly modeled after the investment case for ecological agriculture that came out 2016 and then got updated by SLM Partners, and which is on your website. I will link to that. And one of the pieces there, of course, shade, super easy, go to.
Yes.
Most people sort of grasp that. We already got a few levels deeper now in terms of actually it helps your pasture. Actually, it helps because we need higher trees, etc. Then there's the whole feed piece for ruminants and non-ruminants and monogastric animals. Let's get into the not so obvious benefits of having productive trees, but not for human consumption, in your or integrated in your pasture.
Yeah. So as you said, so shade is what we'll call maybe the low-hanging fruit. But then fruit is that's the next
low-hanging fruit is better. I'm sorry, that is a better one.
So the shade is kind of the next, tree crops. So fruits, nuts, pods, that's the next level here that we want to be able to add. So any tree is going to provide shade, but we want to have trees that are going to really bring a lot of additional benefits to the farm. So and let's break this up into trees for feed for monogastrics. So that's pigs, chickens, turkeys, those kinds of things. And then ruminants, so your cattle, sheep, goats, because there are very different ways that they consume plants. So for ruminants, cattle, sheep, and goats, we want to focus on, and this is in general, we want to focus on tree crops that are going to be made available during times of year when livestock don't have enough feed. So that's very critical. And every area has its own kind of unique seasonality, seasonal fluxes of when feed is available. So right now, as we record this, in Pennsylvania, everything is bright green, and it's the beginning of May. Everything is bright green. It's lush. There's tons of forages, and livestock have more feed than they need. And so people hay it and they store it for later. So if we were to put in tree crops that were to bring additional feed right now, it's really kind of wasted because we have more than we need right now. But during the summer, we know that consistently, if you have a summer slump or you have a drought, that's when we need additional feed, and that's in the form of fodder, so leaf fodder. And then
also known as tree hay.
Tree hay. Although tree hay is, I think of it as something that you harvest and then you store.
Okay. This is fodder, which means you cut, you prune, and let it
cut
fall
it, drop it. Yeah, very simple, low labor or much lower labor than tree hay. I would never recommend people to do tree hay on any kind of large scale unless they really figure out how to mechanize it. And then in the fall going into the winter, we know every year you don't grow anything during the winter. So can we stockpile additional feed, whether it's the form of honey locust pods or persimmon fruits or potentially acorns or things like that, especially high energy feeds that are going to provide those livestock with the energy, the warmth that they need to get through the winter, or actually to put on additional pounds and to increase their yield during those fall and winter months. So that's what we want to do, is we want to have the right types of feed available at the right times of the year in order to smooth out those curves of having a lot of feed at one time, but then not enough feed at other times of the year. And then on the monogastric side, so your pigs and your poultry, monogastric just meaning one stomach. So rather than having multiple chambers in their stomach, these animals have one stomach, and so they need simpler food, easier to digest food. And typically that is grains. So corn and soybeans is what is commercially fed. But on a pasture-based operation, we want to see our clients be able to get rid of a lot of their inputs. A lot of the cost of doing business and raising pigs and poultry is in the feed that you have to buy in order to feed them. So we know that we can also plant trees that are going to drop feed for them. And that basically comes down to, in the summer, that's mulberries. So for us, it's June, July, August. In Georgia, you can start having mulberries a full month or almost 2 months earlier than we do. And then going into the fall months, then you have just a whole bunches of options. So that's persimmons and oaks and chestnuts and apples and pears and all kinds of different things that are dropping during the fall months that can provide additional feed for your livestock then.
And that really means specifically if you're in the organic space, you're trying to substitute this very expensive grain that comes from elsewhere. We've seen spikes in prices specifically here in Europe, but I'm imagining also in the US. A lot of it came and comes from Ukraine, of course. That became a lot more difficult. And so you're very dependent, even if you're an organic system, from outside sources. And of course, if you can grow something that provides shade, provide better pasture, in the months you need it, of course, there's some variables in an equation to fix. But once you fix that for a certain latitude and also to a certain context, you've done it. It's not that your neighbor who runs pigs and 10 kilometers away. It's not going to be so different.
No.
And then you can replace quite a significant amount of this input, because most of the pigs and poultry run on inputs. It's not that they can forage a bit, but it's not a whole lot, not like ruminants. And it's an interesting market. If you see all the egg business at the moment, the organic chicken or especially pasture bird and pasture birds that have been on pasture, etc. There's a good market there to explore. So how's been the uptake, like a ruminant versus, or is it sometimes people that do both? Like how's been the uptake in terms of going from a dairy farm, a grass-fed dairy farm that wants a few trees for shadow and shade, to these slightly more complex systems that also internalize the feeding side of things?
Yeah. So we're just on the cusp of doing a lot more with those, with pigs and poultry. And a lot of that is being led by our nursery, because we can propagate mulberries and we can propagate persimmons at this point a little bit easier than we can honey locusts. We can produce them at larger quantities and at better prices than we can for our honey locust trees. And honey locust is really our number one for our cattle. And that's been the backbone of our business to date, has been working with these small dairies in our area. Most of our clients are Amish and Mennonite, and they have small organic dairies. That's been our main clientele. And we've done almost all of our jobs within 2 hours of where I'm sitting right now in my home office. So we've been very locally oriented, where
focus on the nursery and the seedling side of things, because that's it's amazing if you say I want 10,000 trees or 5,000 or 1,000, but if you cannot get there.
Yep, exactly. And that's where so we started out not having a nursery and really much more of a services company, and we still are I'd say primarily a services company, where we do the consulting and we help people find funding, find cost share to do these projects, and then we will do the planting. And we will take care of the trees after they've been planted as well, because we know that you just need to be able to get in there and make some tweaks, make some adjustments a couple times a year, just to make sure that just a little bit of weeding, maybe a little bit of pruning, and make sure that the protection that's there to provide to keep the livestock off is up to date and is not falling apart. So just little things that they go a long way towards making sure that those trees survive. So those are that's the suite of services that we provide, and our goal is to make it as easy as possible for our clients to say yes to Silvopasture. And then in the last couple of years, we've really started to invest more in a nursery, so that we can have much higher quality nursery stock to provide to our farmers. So we've been really focused first and foremost on ruminants, and that's most of the landscape is in, whether it's dairy or beef, and throughout the country it's much more skewed towards beef. So that's the largest applicability by far. Over 100 million acres in the U.S. that is right now being grazed by cattle. It's open, that could easily have silvopasture integrated in. But then when I look at what has the highest upside and what can really transform the way that we do agriculture the most, that's where pigs and poultry come into the place. Because right now, if you're someone who's raising those on pasture, you have a slight advantage to someone raising them in a CAFO, because you're getting, let's say, 20% or 30% of your feed is being reduced because they're eating forages and grubs and insects and that kind of thing. But they're also, it's a much less efficient system to be able to manage, so much more labor input needed. And you're probably still feeding the same amount of feed, actually, even though they're getting some of their feed from their forages from the pasture. You're probably still giving them the same amount of feed, because in a CAFO system, the animals don't hardly move. So they don't get the exercise, they don't burn energy. And so there's not many competitive advantages of a pasture-based system compared to a CAFO industrialized growing system. And what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to offer to our farmers that they can reduce their input costs by having these perennial feeds dropping for free for their livestock. But also, I want them to be able to tell a much better story. So I want them to be able to have videos that they show to their customers with chickens eating mulberries, with the Thanksgiving turkey filling up on chestnuts and persimmons, with the bacon that they're selling being bacon that was fed off of acorns or whatever it is. Like, those are the kinds of things that I think we can reduce the cost of doing business, and we can like have the highest quality feed. It's organic. It doesn't have polyunsaturated fatty acids in it, or much lower content because it's coming from fruits and nuts and that kind of thing. So all the things that folks want to pay a higher margin for, and it's just created and produced with the very highest quality of animal welfare. So that's what I want to be able to make available to farmers who are already raising livestock out in pasture. And this is just a way to stack another enterprise and a higher margin enterprise on the same land base.
You're meaning farmers that are already, let's say the organic dairy and grass-fed dairy farmers around you would be also introducing pigs and poultry on their land.
I would love to see more of that.
And what's currently limiting? I mean, apart from that, it's a massive other enterprise on top of it. Like, it's not so. Let's not underestimate that. Let's say. But what are the main limitations? Is it the seedlings? Is it knowledge? Is it everybody else is doing dairy, so why would I put chickens? In a more scaled way? For sure, they have some chickens around the house, but not, let's say, not in a more structured way. Like, what's holding them back to start experimenting, or maybe some have?
So I'd say first is the nursery stock. So having the right material to put out there. So for the three trees that we focus the most on in our nursery, that would be honey locust, persimmon, and mulberry. Each one has male and female flowers on different trees. So only the females are going to give you anything. So just by being able to clonally propagate these trees, you're going to double the amount of production that you're going to get versus putting a whole bunch of seedlings out there and then half of them aren't going to give you anything anyway. So that's a major, again,
How far away are we from that?
So this last year, we were able to start offering clonally propagated mulberries. And by the end of this year, we should have 3 or 4 different cultivars of mulberry and 1 persimmon. And then in 2 years, we should have a number like 6 different cultivars of mulberry and 6 of persimmons. And then honey locusts we're working on via grafting. And maybe at some point we can get those into tissue culture and be even more efficient yet through clonal propagation.
What does tissue culture mean, and how did you get the mulberries to do the what you just described? Or I already forgot the name.
So
what's currently when you have two, you have a male and a female. Do you have to go around,
let's break it down.
Wait for a bee, or you have to go around with a little pencil to touch them?
So even if you were to do that, you're still going to get a seedling, and chances are you'll get either like 50% chance of getting a male or a female. And you can do that, but you're having to spend twice as much time and effort and money into getting all these trees out there. And if you can just clonally propagate, then you know that every tree that you're going to put out there is going to yield what you want. And so there's a couple of different ways of getting clonal propagation. One is grafting, and grafting is old, tried and true technique of doing this. Every apple orchard in the country is grafted. And the challenge there is some species don't graft quite as well. Like mulberry is one that it just pushes a lot of water when you cut it and when you graft it, so it doesn't graft quite as well. And then others like a persimmon. Persimmon is kind of notorious for dying back to the roots. So you can plant it out, and it's a tree that comes back from the roots very well. So what I think is going on is if the plant is stressed, it might say, you know what, this top, I'm just going to abort the whole top of the plant, and I'm going to put my energy back in the roots, and I'm going to come back from the roots this next year. And so we've had quite a few scenarios where we were putting out a tree, thankfully not too many that were grafted because those are expensive, and the tree died back to the roots. And then it came right back. So you get a tree, but if that was a grafted persimmon that you're putting out there for $40 or $50 and it dies back to the roots, and then all you have is a really, really expensive seedling. So we can't really do that. We can't recommend that to our clients at scale. And then for honey locust, we're talking about being able to graft, and that's probably the best method that we have so far. And we're seeing if we can get tissue culture, that term that I used earlier, is really just a micro propagation technique where you send off a tree to a lab, and they have very sterile environment, and they have these little jars with a gel in them, and they take little tiny pieces of the plant and they put it in there, and they get it to root and they get it to grow, and then they just snip that little plant into 3 pieces, and then they put it back into the gel and they start again, and then they're just constantly propagating, so multiplying and multiplying and multiplying. And the really neat thing about it is you can turn one plant into like hundreds of thousands in the course of a year. So that's why we're going after tissue culture. Is you're just able to take the few genetics that we have available, because we don't have a whole lot available in this agroforestry space. It's really been neglected, and quickly scale them up much faster than you can with grafting, which is a more traditional practice, but it is much slower in order to get those numbers that you need.
Yeah, and the crafting, and it's interesting how it's been neglected. Also, when you talk about, and then we'll get back to other challenges. Like when you talk about the data, and there's just very little. Like if you start looking at economic data, if you start looking at, okay, what does a mulberry field do, or how many trees do you need for versus etc. in this context, basically there's nothing. I read between the lines, or very little. Because we separate the two, let's say, production of feed and the production of livestock in all kinds of different shapes and forms.
Yes.
So other challenges, is it also just a mental? I mean, people are already doing grass-fed dairy, maybe they're starting to use shade and things that you provide for ruminants. Is it a big mental step to go to poultry and pigs?
I think part of it is, what I want to see brands that are built around this. So a brand that can go to a farmer and say, here's a contract for you to grow pigs to this specification.
Tyson does now, but in a slightly different environment.
Exactly. Tyson, but in a pasture. And like having systems, having protocols and having contracts, right? Because if I go to a farmer and I say, hey, let's plant these mulberry trees, and in 5 years, you're going to see significant production off of these trees, and you're going to be able to make a profit by running pigs underneath them. That's just me telling them that this is possible. And again, there's not a whole lot of scientific data. There's anecdotal data, but there's not a whole lot backing this up. But if they had a company that could provide them with a contract, that they know that they can get pigs for a certain price, and that they can sell pigs for a certain price, and that they're going to be able to make a profit off of this. I think that's really the limiting factor in that space, is just knowing where to sell these and where to be able to produce these for.
And do you see the farmers you're working with now on the ruminant side, are you already taking into consideration they might add poultry and pigs later on? Or are you providing a lot of ruminant feed and shade that may later on becomes tricky? Or how does the field look like that you worked on, let's say, in terms of possibility, but also in terms of the neighbor that hasn't done?
Yeah. So we're mostly focused on the ruminants. For someone who's already raising dairy or beef, we're mostly focused on supporting those enterprises, unless they tell us, hey, I want to add chickens or pigs, or I want to add tree crops like chestnuts or something else like that, because we definitely do that as well. But for the most part, our main focus is on supporting those livestock that they already have and potentially want to build in there. So right now, through our nursery, we're now at the point where we can provide these mulberries and persimmons, and I'm anticipating that by the end of this year, we'll have mulberry trees in particular that are 6 feet tall or more, and so we can put them out there, and in a year or two, they're producing fruit already. And so that the nursery side is then going to be able to advance that further than what we have been able to so far. Because today, if we wanted to get a grafted mulberry tree or a grafted persimmon tree, we're paying $40-$50 a piece for those, and they're only 1.5 feet tall. Like that's we just can't do that. It's much too expensive for us to do for our clients. Whereas a shade tree can cost $3. But now if we can, through our own nursery, if we can put out a tree that's 6 feet tall and it costs $20 instead of $40, we're getting twice the tree for half the price. Now it starts to be much more interesting and much more affordable for our clients to be able to do that.
Yeah, and it's interesting the point you made as well on like human food versus animal feed. Like the meat market and other animal products is very well established,
yes,
compared to chestnuts in the US versus not so much. Like the human food side of things in agroforestry is super interesting, but still except when you're doing coffee or cocoa. But of course, in the more temperate climates, that's difficult. It's just feeding into a current system that is established, where if you can lower feed costs, you have a winner quite quickly. Compared to establishing a new market for chestnut flour, which we absolutely have to, and I'm very happy agroforestry partners and Propagate and others are doing it. But it's seems to be a more uphill battle.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what I really enjoy about Silvopasture is we don't have to work on creating new markets. Right. I think right now we import and this is the US, we import about 4,000 acres worth of chestnut production, which is not much, right? If we were to have 100,000 acres of chestnuts on the market right now, we would completely flood the market. Now, I would like to see a lot more demand developed for chestnuts and the processing to create chestnut flour and all those things. And I think we can push the demand a lot higher than it is right now. But if you were to have 10 million acres of silvopasture right now that's there for livestock, it won't do anything to the demand. The demand for meat is going to stay the same. And the only difference is that those people who are running those 10 million acres are now going to be able to produce more off of that piece of land with a lower cost of input. So very simple. I think no one's going to get crazy rich with it. But it's going to be able to provide much more resilience to a lot more farmers, and with the stability that they know that this is going to work for them.
And other places where Portugal, Spain are famous for their oak savannas, let's say, but other places where silvopasture, for instance, in dairy, etc., is more common. Like, where do you look for inspiration and insights, or we've pretty much separated the two very well, either 100 years ago or 50 years ago, whenever that happened.
Yeah, there's very few examples for us to look to. The oak savanna of the Dehesa in Spain, as you mentioned, is probably the best example that's out there. And it gives people at least a visual. It's just such a different context than what we have, but at least it gives people a really beautiful visual of what this can look like. There was also an oak savanna in North America that was managed for hundreds, probably thousands of years. So much of the area that is now wooded, and it's kind of separated out into cropland and pasture and woods, was a much more diverse mosaic of savanna at one point. But we really don't have that as an example these days. The main way that silvopasture is done in the United States at this moment is like a pine timber silvopasture, and mostly in the southeastern part of the country. But that is one, it's just not very applicable to where we're at. And also they're pretty low margin games. Having like a pine plantation is a very low margin, large acreage game that you can't really do very well at. So what we mostly promote is less the timber side of things and much more focused on just the livestock and supporting the livestock.
And is there another way of flipping this instead and actually going to the forest, more forested areas and started grazing them and thinning? Is it something that's happening, or is that very tricky in terms of regulation? Because of course you separated everything. And like on the forest and grazing side, is that maybe not your focus, but is that happening, or at least
it is happening? Thankfully, it's less of a challenge of regulation here in the United States. I think Europe often has more protections that if you were to take a woods and convert it into a pasture, that you're paying much higher taxes or other you're getting disincentivized that way. But for us and at Trees for Graziers, it's just not our focus, because we're mostly in an area that has a lot of open space and not a lot of trees. The land in our area is very expensive. There's a lot of competition for the land, and so the prices are very high. And no one lets their land just grow up into trees. So we need to be very thoughtful and strategic about how to integrate trees in our context. But throughout much of the country, there is, especially low value grazing lands, there's a lot of trees and there's a lot of brushiness, and a lot of the focus on silvopasture is taking those woods, especially degraded woods that have been cleared of all the best timber trees, and removing more trees to create more pasture. So there's a lot of opportunity there. I would love to see a lot more foresters be able to consult, because that's really the main challenge, is you need to be able to do that well and strategically, and you need someone who has experience in the grazing side and knows livestock, knows forages, and knows how to take an existing woods and thin it down properly in order to create the right kind of savanna silvopasture system. So I'd love to see more of those professionals.
And it's a fascinating thought, because a lot of these were managed ecosystems back in the day by indigenous peoples, tribes, etc., had been abandoned, and they grew into a forest, which is not probably the best ecologically speaking. But then how do you get it back? Fire risk in many places, abandonment, fenced around and it's just interesting to what is it, baseline syndrome, that we used to those and think, oh, this is a natural quote unquote forest. Wow, it's actually just super degraded and not functioning at its peak at all, because it's missing big graziers and it's missing that savanna-like space. And big chunks of Europe as well have been reforested because abandonment. And we now think, oh, that's a good thing, which it is, but it's also a risk. Because much of the UK and much of other places were more savanna-like, slightly thicker pieces of forest, but also slightly open, with a lot of oaks and a lot of trees like that, and a lot of graziers. And so which is also where we thrive the best. Like we're the forest edge people, not the forest people, but also not the open field people necessarily.
We need trees to be able to climb up into.
Yeah, but not too many that you're completely locked into. And so we feel really at home there. Probably that's why these few systems we have left, like in Spain and Portugal, attract so much of, because there's a natural balance. Or the savannah, if you go to certain countries and places in Africa, and you really, it feels beautiful without really knowing why, and because that mix of trees and landscape and animals makes a lot of sense. And as we're not returning back to that, and maybe some technology pieces now make it more possible with virtual fencing, etc. Because of course fencing pigs in can be very interesting. I haven't seen virtual fencing for pigs yet, but fencing pigs in general and goats is tricky. And so then it's great to say, oh, let's graze the forest, but yes, let's not lose all the pigs in one go, because that definitely happens. What do you see as your main message for investors, for people working in the financial space, either investing their own money or other people's money, that are definitely far away from the daily reality of shade and the daily reality of feed and the daily reality of what a forest could look like and what natural is? What would be your main message if you could plant? I always like to say a seed in their mind. If you could plant one seed, what would be your main message to, let's say, the financial world on this silvopasture behavior?
So the way that I think about this is that with silvopasture, you're able to take a marginal piece of farmland that is
just to be clear, we're going here for super arable land. This is hayfield. This is undervalued, but also underperforming. If you look at the ag land classification, this is not on top.
Exactly. We're not competing here with corn and soybean land. You could, and I think actually silvopasture probably could be more profitable because your inputs are so much lower. But to start out with, we're probably going to focus mostly on those marginal
the beast. Yeah,
not quite yet. Once we have more data, I think we could make the economic case that this is because it is so much lower input that you probably could challenge the profitability of those systems. So right now, this marginal farmland is low input, but then also low output. Right? There's not a whole lot of margin on it. With a silvopasture system, you can take a piece of land and now it's low or medium input and it's medium to high output is what it's be able to produce for you. So you're able to capture a larger margin on that. Now, the challenge is it takes patience. Like that's really the thing is this is not
a financial question. That's a financial question. Patience is a financial question.
Yep. So you can do this. It takes patience. It takes upfront capital and patient capital that's willing to wait and play the long game in this space. So really, we're talking about being able to make substantial increases to land at a very, very large scale. And I think whether you're looking at the productivity of the land or even just the monetary resale value of the land. I was listening to an audiobook by Alan Nation recently, the former founder of the Stockman Grass Farmer, who wrote about how land really is valued in the United States, at least, less for its productivity, its productive capacity, and in many ways it's valued more for the recreational value of the land and the aesthetic value of the land. Because you have a lot of people who aren't necessarily earning money from the land, but they have an off-farm job and they want to be able to hunt on the land. They want to have a beautiful place to live in the country but they can still earn money off in their town job. And silvopasture is a really great synthesis of those two where you can actually get more productivity, but it also looks a whole lot nicer. And for folks who are interested in wildlife and hunting, you're able to get so much more wildlife productivity off of this land. And you're able to drop tons and tons of feed for deer and turkeys and bears and all kinds of things. And so whether you're looking at this from simply an agricultural productivity perspective, or you're looking at this from the perspective of I want to be able to come into land, buy it, develop it, into silvopasture and then sell it to people who want to come in and have a beautiful, productive, resilient homestead. You could also pitch this from the perspective of, do you want to have a place to live that is just raining down with all kinds of human food staple crops that you know that in the worst case scenario, if in a doomsday scenario, you're covered. You have this source of food. Every year. So there's a whole bunch of different ways that I could see investors being able to bring money into this space and make very significant improvements to the land in a way that is also a good financial return.
And like next to or beyond the seedling nursery piece, like having, of course, enough quality and quantity and price. With an okay price, what's the other big limitation? What are other big barriers? Apart from the mental one that we sort of forgot trees in the landscape, let's say we overcome that. Like we all wake up tomorrow morning with a lot more trees on our mind, and we're like, oh, where did they go? What are other big barriers for this to being rolled out on the ruminant side? Even though it's really not you don't need to be you need to be profitable, but a lot of ruminant farmers, as you said, or ranchers, aren't necessarily profit focused because they have off-job farms, off-farm jobs. Like, what are the limitations there to roll this out on tens of millions of acres?
Yeah. To do that, you need service providers who can make this as easy as possible for farmers. Because even though this aligns very, very well with the values of just about anyone who's raising livestock on pasture gets that trees can benefit their livestock, and that they need more feed at certain times of the year. So people get it, is what I'm finding. But the thing is that most people don't have the time, the energy, the money, the know-how, the specific tree know-how to be able to set up these systems in a way that's successful. So having service providers whose job it is to make this simple for them is really what I see as a huge limiting factor at this point. That's why we've been able to have as much success as we've had in our area. We have a team of 9 people right now, and we really only cover a very small area. We cover like less than a quarter of one state in the country, right? So you could have companies like us, you could have
everywhere
100 of them, and you still probably wouldn't have enough. And so like we can't, the farther
like the solar providers that popped up everywhere, and like how to get these panels on, how to measure them, wire, contracts, subsidies left and right, what makes sense, not sense, okay, maybe some batteries or not, like a charger for your car, like all of these, like, somebody has to manually put them on the roof, maintain them, clean them, sometimes wire them differently. There's an inverter that breaks down, etc., which is a huge boom of like hundreds of thousands of people work in the States just in that sector.
Yes. Yep. I compare let's call it the silvopasture industry, which is not, the industry isn't a whole lot yet, but I think I compare it often to the solar industry of like right now, I could go out and I could buy solar panels and I could put them on my roof. I could watch a whole bunch of YouTube videos and figure out how to wire them to my system. I would probably fall off the roof and die. If I didn't do that, I would probably electrocute myself or burn the house down trying to install the solar panels. I also don't necessarily have the cash to be able to invest in these panels right now because it's going to take 12 years for them to break even. So all of those barriers mean that, and I just don't have the time, I don't have the expertise, I'm not going to figure it out, and I'm not going to do it by myself. But I could call someone who lives right down the road they can set me up with the panels, they can install them, they can give me a projection of how long I'm going to be till I break even. They're going to help me navigate the bureaucracy in order to get my tax credits off of these solar panels. They're going to have an electrician to install these, all of these things that for me, it's super simple. And they might even be able to set me up with a payment plan that I don't have to put all this money down up front, and I can cash flow it, and I can be cash flow positive throughout the whole lifespan of these solar panels. So all of the things that the solar industry has figured out in order to make this accessible to homeowners is what I want to figure out to make this accessible to farmers. And then we just need a whole bunch of companies, and it could be nonprofits as well. Like it can be nonprofits that are providing services to farmers in their area. They're just doing all of this for farmers in that area too. And that's something that we provide. So we have a training program that we call SilvoPro, where we bring people in from all over the country and we show them exactly what we've done, the techniques of how to protect trees in a pasture, but then also how to put a project together, how to provide the right services. If you can't provide all the services, how do you find the right people in your community to do those? So we're actively trying to get more people into this.
I mean, at the end, I always, it's a bit of a wonder we repeat it many times, but at the end, the little leaves on the trees or large leaves are solar panels, and you're turning them into sugary substances and fibers and all of those wonderful things. So it's not too far. Of course, it's not exactly the same, but I think we can learn a lot from the renewable energy sector in general. 10, 15 years ago or 20 years ago, like what made this bankable? I can now put 1,000 euros into a project and I can get a nice return. I can put it on my own home. I can get a company to do it. I can probably figure it out with YouTube as well, or with someone. Like, it became so easy with all the different banks. Like 15 years ago, it was impossible.
Yeah.
It was not even, I mean, yes, a bank, even a bank wasn't investing in solar necessarily, and it became bankable. We just have to go a bit faster. Probably.
Yep.
But a lot of these things are very similar. And I'm imagining quite a few people from the renewable space, I already see that are coming into regeneration and regen food and ag because they see similarities to the sector they sold before. And so flipping the conversation and putting you in the investor seat, what would you do if you had €1 billion or dollars in this case, and you had to put it to work? Of course, not investment amount, exact amounts. Of course, we're not giving investment advice here, but if you had to prioritize, that's why I'm asking you a question. What would be your top priority if you had to put a significant amount of money to work?
Yeah. So one thing that I would like to do, and this is with a relatively small amount of that money, is to have set up a fund with an endowment that is investing in tree crop research over the long term. Because what we've seen is that tree crops they usually get a small amount of investment for a short amount of time, which just does not work. Yeah, exactly. This does not work as a model for tree crops. These need consistent, even if it is a fairly small amount, it doesn't take a whole lot in order to 10x the amount of research that's been done on a lot of these livestock feed crops. So I would want an endowment that is set aside that for the rest of perpetuity, however long we humans can survive on this planet.
Feed trees.
Exactly.
Research.
Yep. So that's one. It's a relatively small amount. And then another one is I would love to have to develop a brand, like I was saying earlier, a company that can buy these silvopasture finished pigs and poultry from farmers, and so that there's a real value chain in order to sell into a market to sell into for these farmers, so that they don't have to worry about market development and they really can just focus on producing on their farms. That also wouldn't take nearly $1 billion. So I think with the bulk of the money, you'd probably invest in marginal farmland. So buying up marginal farmland and improving it through silvopasture. And whether you're looking to sit on it, hold on it, and be able to continue to produce off of that land, or you're looking to eventually sell it for whether it's for the sheer productivity of it, or you're looking to sell it to someone who's looking at it from a wildlife perspective, an aesthetic perspective, but then also is going to have it grazed or going to graze it themselves, and they're going to get more productivity off of that land. I think those are other ways that I would invest the bulk of the money.
And we like to ask this question, inspired by John Kemp's. What do you believe to be true about, in this case, Silvopasture, that others, I mean, you said there is not such a thing as an industry yet, but there are other people. And so let's say the community, what others don't believe to be true? Like, where are you contrary?
Yeah, I think here it's less of what do I believe that's different. It's more about the opportunities that I see. Because whenever I'm driving down the road and I see an open pasture, I just see opportunity for so much more productivity to happen on that land. And the beautiful thing about it is that not only is this land going to be more productive, it's also going to have more birds and more soil carbon, and it's going to the water going into the stream is going to be cleaner. Like, you get so many additional benefits, and this, like, it just can be applied at the scale of millions of acres. So if I'm driving through an agricultural area that has a lot of pasture in it, I'm just envisioning savanna all the while I'm driving, spread out over millions and millions of acres. So those are the opportunities that I see and that keep me awake at night, trying to figure out how do we advance this steadily and continue to break down the barriers that exist for this vision to become a reality.
When you work with a client or with the farmer, with a client, a customer, partner, whatever you want to call it, how do you bring them along in that? Like, how do you of course, you model it, like what is possible in terms of production increase, in terms of cost reduction. Is it already possible to easily render a video or something, like just to bring people along in that savanna vision you just shared? Like, how do you bring people along in that vision? And of course, the hard reality of the numbers that need to make sense.
You know what I need to do? I need to mess around with AI and take a picture of their farm and see if I can get AI to generate a whole savanna on their farm. That's probably very possible. I would love to play around with that.
Please send us some examples, because I'm fascinated by this before and after imagery, which a lot of like pioneering region farmers haven't done for good reasons. Like also on the number side, like to really get what were they doing in 1980, 1990, and how is it different from now? Like it's difficult. And also the soil carbon, of course, they didn't measure because we didn't measure. And biodiversity, like what's a good benchmark? And also to coming back to that investor piece, people that are super far removed from any of these conversations. Best thing is to bring them to a farm and to a neighbor and show the difference, of course. Getting people out there is not easy. We all know that. It's often far away from any financial center, airports, etc. So what's the second best thing? How do we bring, if the investor doesn't come to the farm, how do we bring the farm to the investor? And I think we're starting to get closer with the Vision Pro, which didn't really go anywhere, Apple, but like there are ways to bring this. And I remember with Agroforestry Partners, when we interviewed them, we had them on, he was mentioning, he took a video, he has it on LinkedIn, I think, I'll put it on the links below, like where he just showed the chestnuts planted, like a field with chestnuts planted, and a field without. And just the sound of the insects was pulsing, like even just a took a video made with a phone, like nothing fancy. Like you could see and hear the difference at a level. And I'm just imagining, like you said, like we can go much further than that yet without going into sci-fi stuff. But having people experience what silvopasture and abundance and diversity could look like, and like, oh wow, that could be just like we're starting to do actually with real estate agents. Like, okay, this is what a house could look like. Actually, this is what your kitchen could look like in that angle or that angle. Like IKEA does it now. Anyway, share some examples if you find the right AI image creator to work with you, and then of course do the numbers with it as well, because once you're at it, like why stop at the image?
Exactly. And this is something that we're only just now starting to get into, like the whole marketing piece, because like I said earlier, most of our clients are Amish and Mennonite, so they're not even using technology. They don't have pictures of their farm, like they don't have that. So, and most of our work has come out of very old school, like we're going to events and we're just showing up time and time again, and we're building trust in the community, and just word of mouth. People have had success with us, and so they tell their brother-in-law and their neighbor and all those. So that's what it's been. It's grown very, very organically, and it makes the most sense because we are a very local business. So we depend on repeat customers and all of that. But as we build out our nursery and have the ability to ship trees all over the country, that's where it's going to be very interesting to be able to start communicating what we've done here, where we can get people out and just walk in the fields, to people who aren't going to be able to come out here and be able to communicate and show off all that we've been able to do and show it visually.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as a final question, which often leads to other questions, but if it's coming, if you could wave a magic wand and change one thing overnight, could be anything. We've heard from all animals outside to all subsidies and insurance to global consciousness to etc. Make the supermarket shelves transparent and see what actually is behind them, not literally. You might not want to see that actually, but how stuff is produced, how is your coffee grown in a multi-strata agroforestry system or the monoculture, etc. What would you do if you had that magic power?
Yeah, I would simply want trees to be able to reach maturity in 1 year. It's like super fast. I think that would, if we could do that, there would be silvopasture everywhere. Like anywhere that people would have any interest in integrating trees, there would be no excuse, because you'd have a mature tree right away. And the main barrier to silvopasture is this 5, 10, 15 year return on investment that you're not really getting a whole lot until that tree is a certain size. But if it could get to maturity in a single year, like that completely changes the game, and it brings those rewards much, much sooner to us. And we're working on it. Like we don't have a magic wand. No one has offered me a real one yet. But the closest thing that we can do is we can plant much, much larger trees. And so when we started out 5 years ago, we were planting trees that were a foot tall, 2 feet tall. And now we're moving much
6
more
feet, yeah.
towards 6 feet. I'd love to do 8 feet. A couple weeks ago, I was out in the pasture of one of our early clients, and some of his trees were 30 feet tall. So like
Wow.
almost 10 meters. And we cut down some of these trees. These are willows and poplars. And we took them to another part of his farm. We dug a hole that was 3 feet deep, and we put those down in there. And it's the most beautiful instant gratification that you can ever get in this agroforestry space. We're so short on instant gratification in agroforestry that it's really nice to be able to come into an open pasture and then 2 hours later leave, and you have trees that are sticking up 20 feet out of the ground. It's absolutely fantastic. So this is
then after, that's the
and
bigger part.
then later they develop roots. So it's really cheap, really easy. Like in a couple hours, we harvested and planted 10 of these trees that are going to provide just a ton of shade, and very quickly. So this is still experimental, but I know that I can get trees established that are 20 feet tall and
What's
just
the
live
big limitation there in terms of planting 6, 10 foot, whatever the number is? That risk of not rooting, risk of moving? What's holding us back? Of course, not having those trees in the first place. Let's imagine you
that's
have
the main
them.
one. Yes,
That's the main one. So that means you have to
Yeah.
put everything now you have into a massive tree nursery, get them to grow, and then in 5-10 years, and keep doing that every year.
Yep. Yeah,
which
I'll
is
do
not
that
an
with
easy
some
thing.
of my $1 billion.
I would, because because the demand comes in, I want trees now. I'm like, you can choose one, like it's 10, 20, 30 feet. What do you want?
Yep,
What do you need?
exactly. Yep.
And then hopefully have a good survival rate of transplanting them, of course. That's the trick with the root system. At that size, the root system starts to be significant as well.
Well, that's the nice thing about these live stakes is that you can put them in. There's no root system needed, and so
Willows
the
are
planting
great.
is really easy. I have yet to find the boundaries of how large of a live stake that you can put in. So I've played around with 20-foot live stakes, popped them in the ground, and they all
talking
rooted
willows
just fine.
specifically here, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Not fruit
And
trees yet. Yeah.
No, not fruit trees. I so wish that I could do this with persimmons and honey locusts and all of the things. That my life would be so much easier that
A
way.
bit less forgiving. Yeah.
We would have silvopasture everywhere if we could do this with those species, just because it's such an easy technique.
So that might be a small line of research, like the continuous research funding that you allocated. Your slides would be just some of these crazy sounding, but what if you would find a few fruit tree varieties and some weird one you found somewhere that actually survives this technique, or even 1 in 2, who cares? 1 in 3. If you could do that at scale, that would revolutionize the speed, or you just do a nice big pole with a solar panel. No, I'm joking. It doesn't get the same effect. So that's really like, how do we speed up and get more larger trees sooner that we can transplant, and in general, how do we get larger trees? It's a funny challenge as well. We've seen it in Brazil in certain syntropic systems. Also the technique around the tree and growing it, you can shave years of development of trees. I think we're only scratching the surface there. Not that it helps to pull the tree and it goes faster, obviously, but there were a lot of ways to make a tree grow faster without all kinds of high-tech gene editing stuff that some people are there. I think but if you can go from 8 years to 6, it's a significant improvement. If you can go from 6 to 4, it starts to become interesting, very interesting. If trees mature in a year, we might figure out some ways to, or refigure out some ways to do that.
We're working on it.
Yeah, I want to thank you so much for coming on here, for the work you do, first of all, bringing Silvopasture back, sort of, or bringing, it always sounds bad when you say going back to, bringing Silvopasture into the picture significantly, and for sharing about your journey here on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Koen.
Thank you for listening all the way to the end. For show notes and links discussed, check out our website, investinginregenerativeagriculture.com/posts. If you like this episode, why not share it with a friend? And get in touch with us on social media, our website, or via the Spotify app, and tell us what you like most. And give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or your podcast player. That really, really helps us. Thanks again, and see you next time.